and Dundela in the County Antrim Shield semi-final, and in rugby it's Bangor against Armagh at 8:15. Now though, it's 20-6.
Good evening. That sometimes controversial priest, Father Pat Buckley, says he's been sacked by Dr. Cathal Daly, the Bishop of Down and Conor. He says he's been left jobless, homeless and penniless. Father Buckley has been told he must leave Larne, where he's worked for the past year, and he won't be given another parish. Lance Price reports.
Father Buckley was summoned to hear the news from Bishop Cathal Daly last Friday. It's the final battle in a long-running war of words with the Catholic Church hierarchy and the bishop in particular. In his own estimation, he's too radical and just a little too revolutionary for the old church establishment.
He gave me two reasons. First of all, the fact that I'd been outspoken against the clergy in the media, and he said he resented people being outspoken about priests. And the second reason was that I had failed to conform more or less to his idea of what a priest should be.
And what did he say his idea was?
I think his idea would be that all of the priests of the diocese should be silent and should let him speak, or at least should say the same things that he is saying or repeat what he says. And he didn't seem to allow for the fact, as I would, that in the church there can be a great diversity of views and at the same time we can all be one.
Father Buckley first came to prominence when he was at St Peter's Pro Cathedral in West Belfast and closely involved with the people of Divis Flats in particular. He became famous for returning cars stolen by joyriders to the police. But at the same time, he was outspoken about the social conditions people had to live in. It was this outspokenness, he believes, that led Bishop Daly to move him to Kilkeel. But he wasn't silenced and continued to speak out on those political issues that mattered to him, notably the use of supergrasses. All of which led to yet another move, this time to Larne, which he called yet another punishment. Here he clashed with the DUP mayor, called the Catholic Church a dictatorship, and kept up the pressure on the supergrass system. Bishop Cathal Daly has refused point-blank to discuss his turbulent priest in any way. But a spokesman for the Catholic Church in Dublin said Father Buckley was on temporary secondment from Cardiff and the bishop had just decided not to accept him for permanent service. Only yesterday, in a letter to the Irish News, Father Buckley called Bishop Daly out of touch and impractical, basically a very conservative man. He's strong with the weak and weak with the strong.
It would appear now that from what he's doing to me and from his attitude generally, he is very conservative and he seems to be always supporting the status quo, whether it's in church or state. And it would seem to me that he would be rejecting any view that was challenging or radical. And I think that's a great pity, because if that's the case, then new life will cease to come into the church.
Father Buckley says he'll be defying the bishop and staying in Northern Ireland. He'll continue as a priest, though without a parish, and he says he'll continue to speak his mind.
Father Pat Buckley. Northern Ireland teacher
signed a petition and staged a picket asking the bishop not to move the priest from his parish.
Both Father Buckley and his parishioners have refused to accept the bishop's decision to dismiss him. The controversial curate aims to sue his boss for unfair dismissal, while his parishioners have been signing a petition and picketing a convent where Bishop Daly was due yesterday to let the bishop know they want their priest to stay. Father Buckley is today seeking legal advice on how best to fight his case. Tomorrow, he says, he's going to the Labour Relations Agency to ask them to set up a tribunal to investigate his claim of unfair dismissal from a full-time job he's had for the past 8 years in the province. Though the bishop has so far refused to comment on what he sees as a private issue, if the tribunal goes ahead, then Bishop Daly will have to answer publicly why he sacked the priest. Meanwhile, thousands of people, both Protestant and Catholic, in Larne and elsewhere, have signed the petition supporting Father Buckley in his wish to stay in Larne.
Kate Smith reporting. 50 years ago tomorrow, Larne
priest supporters in West Belfast this morning tried unsuccessfully to force a confrontation with the Bishop of Down and Conor, Dr. Cathal Daly. They want the bishop to reinstate Father Buckley, who's been told by the bishop that he must leave his parish. Chris Moore reports on today's protest at St Thomas's Boys' School on the White Rock Road.
Parents and members of local community groups were in position to confront Dr. Daly long before he was due to begin his visit to the school. But obviously the bishop had been informed of their protest. A priest had passed through the pickets from the school grounds and a few minutes later could be seen escorting Dr. Daly into the school through another entrance 50 yards away, and much to the disgust of the demonstrators. What do you think that today's action has achieved, because the bishop managed to get into the school?
It just goes to show what the bishop is. He wouldn't even face the people. It speaks for itself, him sneaking into the school. He could have come down and spoke to us.
Moral cowardice on Daly's part. Daly's all right when he's talking to a captive audience in a church. Daly won't go into a public hall. It's typical of the clerical dictator.
But surely, as the bishop of the diocese, Dr. Daly has the right to say who should be in what areas, and he's the manager after all.
And we have the right to say what we think also.
After a brief occupation of the school's reception area, the demonstrators left. Many of them admitted that they'd never even met Father Buckley, but they were determined, they said, to continue campaigning for his reinstatement.
Angela Whereske from Londonderry.
For unfair dismissal against Bishop Cathal Daly because he says he wants a reconciliation. This morning in West Belfast, local people supporting the priest picketed a school where the bishop was visiting.
The residents of the Springfield area picketing at St Thomas's School are the latest to stand up for the controversial curate. But as they waited at the main gates of the school, the bishop walked in through another entrance, avoiding a confrontation and angering the protesters.
Daly is a typical clerical dictator. He prefers to speak to a captive audience from a pulpit. But Daly has never shown moral courage to meet people in a public hall where he can be questioned. He wants to do the talking. You're supposed to listen. But the days are long gone when people are subservient to people like Daly. He just can't realise that he's in the space age.
But it seems that he doesn't want to talk to you, or he would have come down here this morning, so what do you do now?
Well, the man's a moral coward, he has proved that.
It does speak for itself. I think it's been very effective.
It's not
it
a
has let
people's
people
bishop.
see that he hasn't had time to come among the people. Even for an explanation, no, he's just evaded the whole issue.
Despite Father Buckley's own decision to step back from immediate confrontation, the protesters marched into the school, but still there was no sign of the bishop. In disgust, they left their placards and went home, pledging continued support for the priest.
We might as well go now, because there's no chance this bishop coming out now. At least he knows we've been here. Doesn't want to talk to people at all, that's all right.
No, hopefully we'll keep these protests up and hope to achieve.
Well, Father Wilson was reinstated, so hopefully Father Buckley will be reinstated too.
Right, more of today's main news.
He's given his job back, but the parish curate says he wouldn't accept a switch to another diocese. He wants to stay in the Belfast area. Yesterday, during a surprise visit to Larne, Dr. Daly said the church hierarchy must be obeyed. Hours later, Father Buckley was staging a vigil outside the bishop's Belfast residence, as Ian Webster reports.
It was by far the biggest show of support for the sacked priest. Sympathisers from his former parishes in Belfast, Kilkeel and Larne turned up to join the Vigil of Reconciliation outside the bishop's residence, even though Dr. Daly was out at the time. The parish curate says he's temporarily shelved plans to take the Roman Catholic Church to an industrial tribunal over his dismissal. It's still an option, he says, but for the time being, he's hoping to seek a reconciliation with Bishop Daly.
Well, I think it's very important that people realise this is not a protest as such. I think words are very important. It's meant to be a vigil for reconciliation, and we're here today to appeal and to pray for reconciliation.
But if you were to be reinstated, would you be prepared to make any concessions?
Of course I am. Every reconciliation involves both parties making concessions, and there may be some things that the bishop would ask of me to do, and I certainly will give everything serious consideration, and I will do my very best to be open and to be flexible.
A report out today from
the home of Bishop Cathal Daly yesterday. Father Buckley, who says he was dismissed for criticising the Roman Catholic Church, has postponed taking an action for unfair dismissal in the hope that the bishop will give him his job back. The apprentice boys of Derry.
When churchmen met the IRA at Vigil in 1974 to work out a ceasefire, the attempt came to naught. When the peace people took to the streets in the 70s, thousands marched, but the violence is still with us. Groups like the Corrymeela community have worked to reconcile the two communities, but the divisions remain. Individuals, too, have tried in their own way. The Reverend Joe Parker, who became so disillusioned he emigrated. The Reverend Armstrong crossed the road in Limavady to attend a Catholic service at Christmas and walked into controversy. He now lives in Oxford. And Father Pat Buckley, now in trouble with his bishop for his radical views on the Church's role in society. Good evening. As the political temperature rises once again and attitudes harden in the shadow of the Anglo-Irish talks, we look at the work of those committed to peace and reconciliation. At a rough count, over 40 groups are working away, trying to unite hearts and minds in our divided community. For reasons of time, they can't all be represented in the programme. In a moment, though, we'll take a look at 4 different approaches to the same problem. The process is unspectacular, sometimes dangerous, always slow. Progress at times seems to be minimal. But some individuals feel the time may be right for fresh moves, a shift from the individual approach to something more coordinated.
Well, I think at the moment both communities, Catholics and Protestants, are feeling increasingly harassed, as it were, through the problems of unemployment, poverty, vandalism and crime. And I really feel if the various groups involved in that could get together and we could have some sort of coordinated approach to those problems, some sort of community conference, some sort of community charter, I really think that might be the way forward.
Yes, I think that one of the groups in which I'm involved, during 1984, you will recall that the Republic's government was concerned about alienation in the North. And we feel that that issue of alienation is well worth examining, not least by the Northern Ireland people themselves. And indeed, back in September of '84, we advocated to the Secretary of State that he should set up a commission made up of people from both traditions to look at the whole question of alienation.
2 new ideas about the way ahead, and shortly we'll look at them in more detail. First, however, let's look at the tactics of those dedicated to peace and how the high profile of the 70s has given way to the low-key style of the 80s. Jamie DeLargy now reports on 4 groups committed, like many others, on the various paths to peace.
Northern Ireland society continues to be very seriously divided. Great progress has been made, but at the religious level between Catholics and Protestants, at the political level too, between Unionists and Nationalists, at the economic level between those who have jobs and have no jobs, and at the cultural level between men and women, there is great polarization. We in the Columbanus community want to do something. Actions speak louder than words, and we want to give living witness here by being a residential community of Catholics and Protestants living together. Within the Belfast Telegraph among the church notices. Yeah. Let's have a word about the kosher supper that we're preparing for tomorrow evening with the visit of Rabbi Solomon. Do you think many people would be coming to the lecture?
This group has a low-key approach to peace-seeking. Members issue no statements, call no press conferences. Instead, they simply share the same home and the same prayers. For these people, mixing is the message.
We want to do something rather than to say something. We want to give an example of what a more united church, a more just society, a more peaceful world could be like.
Are you saying that your actions would speak louder than your words?
Yes, somebody said that is our motto, really, or could be our motto, that be doers of the word rather than hearers. We want to do things rather than to say things. We want to make our statements in deeds rather than words.
The most encouraging thing has been that within this 2 years, people have begun to come and use this house as a meeting place. We've had more than 1,000 people sign the visitors' book, and the greater number of those are from Northern Ireland. And that, to me, is very encouraging. Here in the garden, We had a day during the summer when a group of clergy from an area in the city, from both traditions, spent a quiet day together, and they hope to come back, and other groups are beginning to do the same.
As an evangelical Presbyterian, life at Columbanus was a major challenge to Margaret Wilkinson. For her, the survival of the community speaks volumes to Ulster's divided society.
I hope that it will come to reassure some of the people who feel that they can't come together with Roman Catholics without compromise, that this is possible. I have found my own faith, I think, deepened with a deeper appreciation of my own tradition, but I have been learning, as I think I learnt in my first years in India, to put myself alongside those of the other tradition and to try to understand their faith and to try to find a way to make mine more intelligible to them as they are helping me to understand theirs.
But the peace seekers have not always stayed out of the headlines. In 1974, a meeting in County Clare between Protestant clergymen and IRA leaders led to a temporary Provo ceasefire. However, as the fighting returned, so the recriminations followed. 11 years on, Eric Gallagher denies the initiative had been a blunder.
There was no blunder about it. There was a long period of calculated thinking as to what we ought to do and why we should do it. And I think that there are times in life when people who have convictions about things have got to be prepared to show that their convictions can be worked out in action. It wasn't a question of blundering. I think that anything that you do in a thing of that kind has a risk with it. But if you take your action with the best advice possible and with integrity, and if you leave it to other people, I don't think there's anything else you can do.
You don't regret involving yourself in the fecal talks?
Let me put it this way. I regret that they didn't turn out more successfully than they did. I don't regret having made or having taken part in that initiative.
Where do you place the responsibility?
The men of violence in the community. Not the men of violence, the men and the women who incite the young people in our community to do things which are not really what they want to do, totally against them. We've got to stop them. They're only maybe even 1% of our whole community, north and south of Ireland. And we've got to say that, you know, we want no more. We can't take any more. People can't go on dying.
Mairead Corrigan's crusade for peace began in 1976 when a runaway IRA car killed 3 of her sister's children. With Betty Williams, she organised rallies on both the Shankill and Falls, marches which seemed to signal a new dawn here. But disillusionment set in, fuelled by reports that the Nobel Peace Prize money the pair won would not be paid into the movement's funds. It now appears Mairead, for one, reluctantly accepted the cash, a decision she now regrets. To her critics generally, she says,
We did our best. We made mistakes. God knows we made plenty of mistakes because we were amateurs to it. We were just thrown on the scene and we knew nothing about, I knew nothing about politics. I mean, I worked as a volunteer in Andersonstown prisons and working in the community. I knew a little about social problems, but the whole political scene to me was quite new. But now I realise today that the social problems and the political problems are one and the same. So really I think that I've come now to learn a wee bit more, but we were really quite new to all of that when it started. It was very frightening.
It was a movement based on a high emotional wave, and all such movements in history eventually run out of steam, especially when they start to getting down to working out practical ways of carrying through the motivation that brought the group together to campaign.
Did the clashes of personality play any part in the running down of the movement?
At a very low level, yes, but those were not important. It was the underlying factors of difference of opinion about how to pursue the business of building a more peaceful and non-violent society that the real differences took place.
It was a summer in which there wasn't a great deal happening in the international world, and the newspaper men and the television and radio men from all over the world piled into Northern Ireland. You remember that as well as I do. And the result was that there was a kind of bandwagon created, and then they became international figures, and they were hauled off to Scandinavia, to America, to Europe, across the world. And in many ways, in a way, they were absent from Ireland when perhaps they could have been more valuably here.
If one looks at the record, you'll see that we might have flown to Paris or to London or to New York, but we flew out, we did our message, and we came straight back again, and we were then, maybe the next morning, out talking at a school or door knocking in some part of Belfast. We, in those early days, did a tremendous lot of work, but we have since been able to see the fruits of that work in that we have built a network and we have built friends all over the world. Thank you very much for inviting me along today to talk with you. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the Peace People. The Peace People started 9 years ago, and it had a very tragic start.
For Mairead Corrigan, now a veteran peace campaigner, the work goes on. Today she's in a youth club in Downpatrick, explaining the message of her organisation.
We go around talking to young people, just asking them how they think that we can make peace in Northern Ireland and how we can bring about a more just society and what they see to be the ways forward. Well, that's a long way back, you see. But we did the March for Peace, and ever since then we've tried to go on working for peace.
Also appealing to hearts and minds is the Corrymeela community outside Ballycastle, now 20 years old. As a grouping which predates the Troubles, volunteers know reconciliation is a long, slow process. But they see more and more examples of hardliners being swayed away from confrontation.
We know lots of people who have come through our programs who have been people who held very, very extreme positions, but who as a result of really, as it were, standing in other people's shoes, have begun to realize that the views and attitudes of people who were from very different background to their own have been formed and shaped by circumstances which, if they had been in those circumstances, they might not have felt very much different. And when that starts to happen to people, and I've seen it happen to many, many people, then they start moving in a totally new direction. Now, I believe there are a lot of such people out there in Northern Ireland society who are on a new kind of journey in their lives. As yet, they haven't really been able to make their voice as strongly heard as we would like, but we're convinced that there are a lot of them there.
The growing band of converts to peace is encouragement to seasoned campaigners. Some see a time approaching when peace groups should come together to thrash out a solution to the Troubles.
With misunderstanding and mistrust so deep-seated in Northern Ireland, it's clear a bold peace initiative will be fraught with dangers. But some say one will have to be launched if the walls that divide us are to be brought down. The question then remains of how to do it and when.
Is there, in your mind, a case for having a very large gathering of peace groups, a congress, if you like?
I've often thought about this one. And I think that there's something in this. I think that there are all sorts of things that have got to be tried. I have no doubt that that kind of conference could be useful, provided adequate, sufficient preparation had been done beforehand. I think there's no point in getting a lot of disparate groups together without knowing beforehand what they're likely to react to positively. To bring them in from the cold, as it were, and present them with a document might be a recipe for chaos rather than for construction.
But where do we go from here? To look at the peace process in more detail is Tom Lovett of the Ulster People's College, Professor Des Ray, a representative of the Consensus Group, and Father Pat Buckley, the Larne priest whose ideas on reconciliation are, amongst other issues, that have brought him into conflict with his bishop. Tom Lovett, could I tease out this idea of the convention you mentioned at the top of the programme? Is the central issue here not one as of whether the peace groups are ready for this?
Well, you see, I have a bit of trouble when I'm talking about peace groups, or you're talking about them, or reconciliation groups, because I think one of the main problems with them is that they see the resolution of problems here in Northern Ireland very much in personal terms, personal conversion. You know, if we could all suddenly love each other, that in some way or another we'd resolve our problems, whereas our problems here in Northern Ireland are political, social and economic.
How do you see us tackling them?
Well, I think we have to go to the groups in Northern Ireland who are concerned with those social, economic and political problems, so that in actual fact I don't really talk about reconciliation groups. I'm more concerned about community groups, the groups that are trying to tackle vandalism, crime, unemployment, women's groups, the growing number of people involved in unemployment centres. It's those groups, in fact, that I would have thought one needs to go to if you want to find a range of people in Northern Ireland amongst whom one might find, in fact, common ground and the possibility of some way forward.
And that way forward, in your terms, is a convention, a conference idea?
Not necessarily so a conference or a convention, but certainly a getting together of those groups, a getting together, in fact, in order to emphasise what it is they have in common, how those problems should be tackled, and also what are the divisions between the groups, because it's no use running away with the idea that if we find we have a lot in common, that all of a sudden the divisions are going to disappear. They won't disappear. We have to tackle the divisions hard-nosed. And I think, in actual fact, we may well be in the situation now where people are prepared to do that.
But do you really think so? Because there's another view that says that the groups are not prepared to take these issues head on, and that to do so would lead them to chaos and confusion, as Eric Gallagher was saying earlier.
That's if it's done in a very public sense, but I would have thought this thing has to be taken very slowly. I would have thought amongst the groups who are involved in tackling common social and economic problems, in actual fact, we ought to start asking them to talk about how they see the way forward. I think they have some fairly radical solutions in their minds.
Well, maybe we can go back to those in a moment. Can I talk to Professor Desiree? Your idea of tackling alienation, I can hear people saying this is a turn-off. We've already had enough government bodies appointed to examine all aspects of our society. Why another one?
In actual fact, we don't have too many bodies in Northern Ireland. I mean, one of the things, criticisms I would make of the British government is the British government doesn't say to the Northern Ireland people, look, this is a particular problem. We think you should look at it. Representatives of both communities. It's in the looking at it and the examining of the problem that you will, you know, discover the causes of that problem.
Well, let's
suggest
tease out your
solutions,
idea.
and then you might learn. And I think it's the learning, it's the lack of learning in our society.
Well, let's tease it out. How would you see us going about this?
Well, I think that one of the ways that we think that this body could be set up, that it would be representative, as I said, of both communities, and that it would seek to generate a working definition of alienation. People find it very hard to define what it is.
What do you
that
think
we
it is?
examine. Well, I'm not quite sure. I think that basically it implies that you know, that you are alienated from in some particular way. But the more difficult thing is then to look beyond the symptoms to the causes, and then from the causes, as I've said before, to try to suggest remedies to the situation. Now, I think that there is alienation, Catholic from Protestant, but Protestant also from Catholic. And I think that if we could begin to examine the issues jointly, then we might begin to make some progress.
Let me turn that question around. Do you think the credibility of the peace groups depends on their ability to tackle issues like this head on?
I think that, I mean, I think Tom Lovett was suggesting this, and I think that I have strong sympathy with that. I think you've got to tackle real issues, real problems, and the groups that I've worked in have all been joint groups. They haven't necessarily been religious groups, they've also been secular groups, but we've been interested in problems such as unemployment as well as the political problems, and I think that he's quite right in suggesting that.
Well, let me turn to Father Pat Buckley. You, in fact, have confronted this issue of alienation to some extent in a way that has alienated you. You've got yourself into a public row with your bishop, and one of the elements of your criticism is your criticism of the Church's stand on reconciliation. Now, do you think your public stand has been counterproductive?
No, I don't think it has. I've had hundreds and in fact thousands of people getting in touch with me since my present crisis happened. And I think that really that I'm at the beginning with these people of trying to create something new. I think time is going to tell what it will be. I think it's very important for us to have a good idea of what reconciliation means. I don't think it means being nice or having cups of tea or pretending that everything is well. I also feel that it's not sufficient to touch the professional or the middle or upper classes. I think that we have to be very concrete. People have quoted our Pope when he came to Drogheda and said to the gunmen, leave down your guns. But they forget that he also said, if you want peace and reconciliation, you must work for justice. So I think that there has to be a very practical programme for working for justice.
Now, what is the centre of your argument with your church, the establishment?
The centre of my argument with the church, with my church, and I think it would be the same maybe of other churches, is that in many ways we as Christians in Northern Ireland have behaved like ostriches. We've put our heads in the sand and we have pretended that if we prayed hard enough all these problems will go away. And I think it's the old case of God helps those who help themselves. And I think that we have a huge responsibility as Christians and as citizens and as prophetic people to do something about the oppression and the injustices
and the poverty and discrimination and the alienation that Des talked about in our society.
Well, let me just get at this one, because your style, if I could describe it as peace by conflict, could in a sense be counterproductive when you look at the lessons of this programme that you heard a few moments ago. What makes you think that your style of provocative, high-profile attack is going to work?
Well, you see, I'm one of these people who believes that in the church and in society there should be place for every type of style. And there's certainly the place for the more peaceful, quiet thing which we've seen in the film, which I would commend highly. But I think also we need in our society and in the church prophetic people who will challenge the things they see to be wrong.
But Father Buckley, can I put it to you? You effectively got the sack. Now, is that not justification for the lessons that you've been learning in this programme?
Well, I wouldn't like you to think, Brian, that me getting the sack, as you say, is the end of the story. There's going to be quite an interesting epilogue, and I think that I'm very hopeful about the future.
To some extent, Father Buckley has been described as a radical priest. Do you think clergymen are radical enough?
No, I don't. No, not in Northern Ireland. I agree with Father Buckley in actual fact. I think maybe there's too much praying and not enough doing. I mean, I take as an example, for instance, what happens in South Africa, where the United Democratic Front has brought together radical clergymen, community groups, women's groups, trade unions, students, blacks and whites, in order, in fact, to say, well, this is what we need, this is what we say should be done in South Africa about the major injustices that this society suffers from. This is what we think should be done about unemployment, about housing, about discrimination. This is what we think should be done about the South African Constitution. We need something like that in South Africa. Sorry, not South Africa, in Northern Ireland. We need people, in fact, to stand up a little bit more and say things and give a lead.
Well, what about you, Desiree? I think that it seems to me it's very easy to be very sweeping in one's judgments. So speaking as someone who is a church member, I think that one criticism that I can make of the church is that I think that too often it has been partisan, to the side to which it belongs. And I think that is a criticism that I would make. But I also would have to say that there are certain men who emerged from the last 16 years with considerable credit. And far be it for me to interfere between a bishop and his priest. It seems to me that's almost as bad as interfering between a man and his wife. But nevertheless, I would say that Bishop Daly has made a very worthwhile contribution to the society in which we live and has attempted to understand the problems. Well, on the Protestant side, I think Dr. Gallagher has spoken, and on this programme tonight, John Morrow, they are people who have sought to relate to the problems of this community, and I think that they have made a very genuine and worthwhile contribution.
Well, now, it's not our purpose in this programme tonight to look at the squabble between Father Buckley and his bishop. But what we do want to get at is the central issue of whether or not the church is prepared to come forward. Now, there's a criticism by one of the former members of the Peace People, and they said, if I can quote, that the real failure of the churches is not bigotry, but vagueness in the face of bigotry. Now, would you agree with that?
Sorry, I'm not quite...
They said not bigotry, but vagueness. They're not prepared to take a clear stand on the question of bigotry.
Yes, I think that that is a fair criticism. I think that this is one of the reasons for what we suggested originally. We want to face the real issues of this society. Where there are people, Father Buckley has quite correctly talked about justice. What we want to get is that the truth of these various areas of alienation and face them. If we don't face them in this society, and as I've said before, they are not limited to the Catholic side, they are also on the Protestant side, then it seems to me that we're running away from the problems.
But let me tease out a thought with you, Father Buckley. You have been a lone voice in this. Now, I wonder, in fact, are other people embarrassed by the stand you took?
They might be. At the same time, I think that there are a lot of people who want to say the things I've been saying, and some of the letters I've been getting from people, both Protestant and Catholic, have said to me, you are simply articulating some of the things that we have felt for years. Now, I would like to say that I agree with Des very much that the churches on the various sides have identified a little bit too much with a particular political tradition. And that's why, in that case, then I think the gospel and its powerful message can get squeezed out. And I think that we have got to perhaps think about getting away from old models like nationalism and loyalism and begin to think of a new model together that will take into account our common humanity and perhaps our common Christianity.
Now, let me ask you, Tom Lovett, do you have the feeling that some people have expressed that that society doesn't really want change, that we're more comfortable with the status quo?
Oh, no, I think we want change. I think we need change. We need the challenge. The only thing where I would probably be in disagreement with the other two gentlemen here is that in actual fact I think there's a tendency to think that this is actually a very religious society, whereas in actual fact I think in both communities, Catholics and Protestants, it's very secular at the moment.
What do you think, Desmond?
I agree totally with that. I think that it is a very secular society.
What do you see the next step being in this peace and reconciliation process?
Well, I would agree with Tom here that I think we need a congress or a conference or a coming together of all of the people in Northern Ireland who are interested in working to build a new society here. I think that's a very, very urgent need, and I would fully support him in his suggestion that we should have that conference and have it very soon.
Could I elaborate just what I meant by secular? It seems to me that if one is looking for a genuine Christian witness as distinct from, you know, that makes a contribution to the society, that's the important thing, and it seems to me there's not enough of that.
Gentlemen, that unfortunately is all we have time for from this edition of Counterpoint. Clearly the success of the groups working for peace depends on the kind of support they get from the public, Protestant and Catholic. But from Counterpoint, that's it for another week.
Buckley from Larne has been handed to the Bishop of Down and Conor, Dr. Cathal Daly. The petition has been signed by several thousand people. It was taken to the Bishop's home in Belfast by a delegation of supporters. Father Buckley is claiming he's been sacked. The Catholic Church, though, says he was working in the province only on a temporary basis on secondment from his original diocese in Wales. Margaret Gilmore reports.
It was a small enough delegation, but one determined to get a new answer as to why Father Pat Buckley has been told to go. They gathered at the Belfast home of the Bishop of Down and Conor, Dr. Cathal Daly, and produced the petition collected in 2 files. It's the second time they've protested at the Bishop's house. Like last time, they didn't get to see Bishop Daly, but to their surprise, this time were asked in. They spent the next hour and a quarter airing their grievances to the Bishop's secretary, Father Eddie O'Donnell. Meanwhile, the man at the centre of the controversy, Father Pat Buckley, admits he has been critical of his church and bishop in the past, but claims his dismissal isn't the answer.
It's going to lead to a division, both in the local church in Larne and perhaps to even more widespread division in the church in Ireland, which I think would be a great pity.
Aren't you perhaps being a little bit overdramatic?
I wouldn't think so. There are many thousands of people all over the country who are very dissatisfied with the church and with the way it's structured.
As Father Buckley waited for news of the meeting, the delegation of his supporters finally emerged from their talks with the bishop's secretary. Did he give you any reasons why Father Buckley has been asked to go?
He said that it's to do with going back to his own parish, his own diocese in Wales, that he was always only on loan. Well, we said that, according to Father Buckley, he wasn't always on loan, that his own bishop had released him from Wales, but he said that the bishop that you have in the first place is the one that you finish up with, and he still thinks that he belongs in Wales.
Do you accept that?
No, we don't.
It's not the first time there have been protests over the decision to remove Father Buckley, but the bishop has refused to comment on the issue from the start. Today was no exception. The bishop is apparently out of the diocese and is still refusing to comment.
Judgment has been reserved in the...
Demanding the Larne curate be allowed to stay in his diocese. 6,000 people signed the petition, but when the Action Committee called at the Bishop's Belfast home this morning, he was out, though they say they got a good reception from his secretary.
And we were received quite gracefully, and we spoke with the secretary and put a lot of points to him, which he said he would pass on to the bishop.
So your conversation has taken almost an hour. What exactly have you been talking about?
Well, we were just talking about things in general, things in the parish and things we thought that the bishop should know about or be made aware of. And he listened, as I say, everyone here was speaking to him. And he said that he would put these points of view to the bishop.
But is there anything new in it? Surely the bishop is quite well acquainted with the situation and what's been going on over the past 4 or 5 weeks.
That's true, but the bishop said that the matter of Father Buckley is confidential and will not be spoken about by him.
Well, was there any sign at all from the conversation that you had inside the Bishop's residence that there will be any movement on the case?
No, we don't think so. No.
So you're not optimistic at this stage?
Not very, no.
So what's the next step? What do you do?
Well, we have other things in mind that we can't elaborate on at the moment.
Good evening, and first a word about special programmes tomorrow. In the afternoon, we'll be covering the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement and the joint press conference by the Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister. And tomorrow night, starting at 9:30, analysis and reaction to the agreement, including interviews with Dr Fitzgerald, Charles Haughey, the Northern Secretary, and many others. Tonight, we're going north too, to look at the background to the running dispute between Father Pat Buckley, a young curate who keeps hitting the headlines, and Bishop Cathal Daly, a bishop who is no longer happy to retain the services of a priest welcomed into his diocese 8 years ago. The Catholic Church has a long tradition of solving its clerical problems in private. Its hierarchical structure and the vows of obedience taken by the clergy ensure that problems rarely reach the public eye. Father Pat Buckley's case is unusual in that the priest-bishop row is very public indeed. Joe Carroll reports.
Father Pat Buckley doesn't look like a rebel priest in his correct clerical garb, but he believes priests should be outspoken, provocative and challenging. He's impatient with his bishop, Cathal Daly, and what he calls the decaying autumnal church in the diocese. And he's scornful of what he describes as some outrageous clerical appointments there. This is the house in Larne that Father Buckley will have to leave sometime before next summer. The order to quit has come from his bishop, Dr Cathal Daly of the Diocese of Down and Conor, who's finally lost patience with his controversial curate. Father Buckley says that the bishop will have to evict him before he leaves the house. And support for Father Buckley has been expressed by thousands of parishioners here in Larne and former parishioners in Belfast and Kilkeel. We look at the short but high-profile career of this turbulent priest. St Peter's, Lower Falls, Belfast. Pat Buckley was a curate here for 5 years. He first wanted to be a priest in Dublin, but had to leave Clonliffe Seminary. He was later ordained for Cardiff Archdiocese. But Belfast was short of priests, and 8 years ago, Father Buckley was appointed to St Peter's by Bishop Philbin with the agreement of Cardiff. The new arrival believed he'd eventually be made permanent. Father Buckley soon showed he was a good mixer and could identify with his parishioners. He became very popular. 2 years after he's left the parish, he's still warmly remembered. But it was and is an area of huge social problems, such as the bad housing in the nearby Divis flats and widespread unemployment and crime.
What would you say the problems here are now?
None to do. Nothing. No discos, no nothing. You're not allowed in nowhere. You're barred from everywhere because you come from the flats. Close the bar down with nowhere to go. Mark man, you see. Can't go nowhere. Everybody in the flats.
That's what the big stink is up down here, you know, with the new houses coming up. People out of the flats, probably living in the flats maybe 15, 16 years. And then there's people from, you know, Upper Falls, Grosvenor are coming over, getting the houses here, and it's the people that should be living right in Divis should be entitled to a house.
What about the unemployment thing then?
It's chronic for
Yeah,
workers.
it really is
We're
bad,
working
like, you know.
class. You tend to go to the house and it's a waste of time sort of thing, like, you know.
Right.
It definitely is, like, you know, it's soul destroying sort of thing, like, you know. I was 3 years on the dole before I got this job, you know. I was in DeLorean beforehand, like, you know. And you get down there and you actually feel as if you're begging. You know, you get down there kidding yourself on that you're going to get a job eventually sort of thing, like, you know. They don't see many, once you see, okay, Lower Falls, or even the Divis Flats, once they hear that when you get down there, it's a different attitude altogether sort of thing, like, you know. I mean, it goes in one ear and out the other.
Jerry Downs, you're a community worker here in the Divis Flats. What's gone wrong with the flats?
Well, it's very hard for to say one single thing that has gone wrong with the flats, but everything has gone wrong with them. When people first moved into them, they had dreams that they were going to be the perfect home to live in, that they were going to have all sorts of wonderful amenities in them. There were going to be shops, there was going to be lifts that worked. They were going to have nice, comfortable homes. And the reality is that the lifts don't work, the shops didn't materialize, and the wonderful homes are riddled with dampness. And instead of the utopia that they were promised, they've some sort of a nightmare now that they have to exist in. Somebody said out of hell there's no redemption, and out of Divis there's no transfer. And that any person, well, any person who, we're not all fortunate enough to be clerics, but any person who lives in Divis, there's a feeling of being trapped in it.
But people like Father Buckley seem to be very popular here for the work he was doing for the people. Is there more need for this kind of attention to the situation by the church, say, here? Could they do more?
Yeah, well, I think that what Father Buckley provided in Divis was a type of non-political leadership. And he certainly identified with the problems of the people and was able, due to his position within the church, to open doors that weren't open normally to people within Divis. He was able to use his position within the church to provide a leadership, and it was a leadership that wasn't attached to any particular political faction.
So the church had to provide the leadership. There was no other political leadership for the people?
Oh, certainly there are other political leaderships, like maybe at times we have too many political leaders because they vie with each other for attention. But what Father Buckley was able to do was to remove the housing issues and to remove the social issues that are plaguing this area. He was able to remove them from the political arena. And when I say the political arena, I mean the sort of tribal political arena that exists in Belfast.
For some bored teenagers in Divis flats, crime was more attractive than political infighting. Car stealing and joyriding provided the kicks to enliven drab flatland. Father Buckley decided to tackle the joyriding menace.
The joyriding in Divis on a very large scale. It's practically a nightly occurrence. And
was Father Buckley able to control this to some degree?
Well, Father Buckley certainly made an effort and was doing a lot of work with joyriders when he was removed from the parish.
So has it gone back to the situation it was before then?
I would say that it's worse now than it's ever been.
Why did you start joyriding in the first place? Was there any particular reason?
Well, no. If you go outside and look around, you'll see yourself. There's nowhere to go. You're not even allowed in here.
Why?
Just won't let you in. You're basically classed as antisocial, so you may as well be antisocial.
What about the church? Were they able to kind of provide you with outlets, youth clubs or anything like that?
Father Buckley was here, like, he sort of, what you would say, when first he brought it to a stop, and he was trying his best in so much of our ways, trying to get you away, out for weekends and that there, but he was only one man. I mean, he was trying his best, but on his own, he done more than the police did or anybody else in the area.
He used to have a set of his own keys, when the stolen cars come in, he used to go down, and try and start them himself with his set of keys and bring them over to a barracks.
And did you let him do this?
Couldn't stop.
Why?
I don't know, because he's a priest.
Was Father Buckley missed in the area then by the youth, do you think?
Well, he did great work. He did marvellous work here. I certainly haven't known anybody that has given so much of themselves as Father Buckley has. His door was opened 24 hours a day, literally. So I don't know anybody else that would be prepared to give that kind of service.
Were the people sorry to see him go?
I think they were. They were very sorry to see him go.
For Marcus O'Muraku, a native of the Falls, Father Buckley was different from other priests.
Well, on a personal basis, I would say, a lot of people don't get to know certain priests who would like to keep to themselves, whereas Once Father Buckley came into the area, everyone knew within a couple of weeks that he came from a family. I think there's 10 in his family. I knew that from just hearing people on the street talking about him. He understood this area where there is a tradition of large families, and he was willing to come out and meet a lot of people with here. And I've been in Kilkeel last year in County Down. He was there. He helped set the youth clubs going and get people interested, take them off the street.
Kilkeel, a strongly Protestant town in South Down, is a world away from Catholic Divis. Bishop Cathal Daly decided young Father Buckley needed a rest after 5 years on the Lower Falls and sent him to Kilkeel. Father Buckley, who at this time applied to be made permanent in the diocese, later learned the move was also a sign of episcopal disapproval of his headline-grabbing activities. He was on probation again. Part of Kilkeel parish is the mountainy district of Atticall. The new curate was soon getting publicity following a terrifying experience there.
Here in this hall we used to run a disco every Saturday night for 400 or 500 teenagers who used to travel from various parts of County Down. And one Saturday evening at 11:30 there was a knock at the door, and when I opened there were two masked gunmen outside who asked me to come out with them. And I didn't know where they were from. I felt that there might be a retaliation gang. But then they told me that they wanted the money that we had collected, and I refused to give it to them. And I managed to get back into the hall and to escape from them, and got across some fields to telephone the police. And eventually they were apprehended within a day or two.
But were you able to identify them to the police, or were you just able to say that you had been held up by two masked men?
No, I was just able to say that I had been held up. But other people, I think, who were in the hall on the night were able to identify them. And at the present time, the two chaps are in Crumlin Road jail awaiting trial. But one of the very interesting things about that incident was that it led to 15 more arrests, and the INLA in South Down was completely destroyed.
So you would feel in some ways you were an instrument towards the breaking up of paramilitary activity here by the INLA?
Right, kind of without intending to. That's the way it happened.
So you're a scourge of paramilitaries on both sides?
I don't know, a scourge of everybody, maybe.
A year ago, Sean Doran fell into the clutches of both the RUC and a nationalist paramilitary organisation. His kidnappers told him about Father Buckley's role in his release.
They said he was in all the papers appealing for release, but they said it'd be up to them if I was released or not, you know. Said, but he was trying hard to get me released. And I think that he might have put pressure, you know, by telling everybody what's going on.
Why did they kidnap you in the first place?
Well, the police have been trying to get me turned an informer for 2 years, you know. And I fought against it, but I was by myself. I couldn't fight them by myself, but then Father Buckley came along.
Did you tell Father Buckley that the police were putting pressure on you?
And he went up and he complained. The police complaints board, everything. Yeah. Put it in all the papers. He fought for me all the way through, you know. And then, only for Father Buckley, they never left me alone. And since that, they have left me alone, you know.
So would you say you owe your life to Father Buckley?
Yeah, I would say indeed I do. And my mother too, because her nerves were cracking up. She's a widow. She had nobody to help her. She went to the ordinary priest before, and they said there's nothing they could do. My sister went up and asked the priest to put it out, say at mass that was kidnapped. The priest said he's probably away in the beer. You know, they don't seem to realise what's going on only for Father Buckley.
The time you were kidnapped, Father Buckley had been transferred to Larne, hadn't he?
That's right.
But was he still able to come over here and help your family?
Yeah, they phoned him straight away as soon as I was kidnapped, because they knew he was the man to help me, you know, because he helped me all along. So my family phoned him up, and he came down, and then he started his appeal to get me out.
DUP Assemblyman and local councillor George Graham reacted strongly to Father Buckley's attack on the UDR for harassment of Catholics.
I think when Father Pat Buckley came to this area, I believe, to be kind to him, he didn't realise the kind of area that he was coming into, that here really was an area where people more or less got on well enough together and accepted, I think, the status quo. But he did run foul of at least he felt he ran foul of the UDR, and he maintained, I think, when the complaints were investigated, they were discovered that there was no foundation to them. But he did complain that Catholic youths, particularly in the parish that he was curate, were from time to time being harassed and hounded by the UDR. I discovered that when I asked the authorities when these investigations were completed that, in fact, there was no substance to them at all. That's the sort of run-in I had with him.
Did you not think that he was acting, as he thought, in the best interests of his parishioners?
Yes, I would have no doubt that he felt that he was acting in the best interest of his parishioners. Having talked to some of his parishioners since that, certainly some of the older folk in the parish of Upper Mourne, I've discovered that they didn't think that. But he felt, I'm sure, and I wouldn't wish to misrepresent his views, he felt that he was obviously speaking in the best interest of his parishioners. But when he had the little run-in with some of his parishioners after that, he discovered that he wasn't actually.
What do you think of him now? He's left the parish. What are your views of what he was trying to do here?
I found Pat Buckley very much to be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I never could really come to terms with what really he was trying to do. Some people have said, to be charitable to him, that perhaps he's just a man ahead of his time, that he's a radical, obviously, within the church, and radicals everywhere are not very well treated, and they're not very kindly treated. I discover now that he's run foul of the bishop again. I would find it very difficult to say what type of man he is. I think as a curate and as a priest, looking after the welfare of his people, he did an excellent job. It was when he seemed to get himself involved in other matters that maybe weren't his involvement that he seemed to run into trouble.
Would you say he was naive or a publicity seeker?
He's certainly not naive. All of us, I suppose, are publicity seekers in some sense of the word. No, I'm not sure if he was even a publicity seeker. I think he felt that perhaps he could change the world in a day. And now the world won't be changed in a day or perhaps even in a week. He felt that he had causes that needed to be supported. He had causes that needed to be highlighted, and he felt the way to highlight them was through sometimes insensitive publicity.
So publicity had again caught up with Pat Buckley. Again Bishop Daly moved him, this time to Larne, another largely Protestant town where Catholics keep the head down. But that's not the Buckley style.
Soon after I came to Larne last September, October, I was engaged in a dispute with one of the local DUP councillors in the local press, and the dispute concerned discrimination in employment in Larne. And soon after the dispute, my house was attacked one day by two men, and there was a girl hurt in the attack, and it appeared to be sectarian. And after the attack, some Protestants from Larne visited my house to tell me that they regretted the attack. And in fact, they said they came to minister to us. And they asked me if there was anything they could do for me. And I told them that one thing they could do was to allow me to visit their churches. So that began the visits to the Protestant churches in Larne. And so far we have visited 12 churches. And in all of them, we've got a very, very warm welcome. And we've taken part in the services simply as ordinary worshippers. The only church that a dispute arose about was the Free Presbyterian Church, and we rang the minister of that church before we went, and he told us that all sinners were welcome to his church, and on that basis we would be more than welcome. And we went there and were greeted at the back of the church by the elders and given hymn books and Bibles and shown to our seats. The service went, as the services in the other church had gone, quite normally. But 2 days later, Mr. Paisley was very upset about the fact that we had visited one of his churches, and he condemned the visit and said that it was insincere and it was for propaganda purposes. And on that occasion then, the Presbyterian minister in the town and the Elim Pentecostal minister came out and defended the visits and said that they regarded them as sincere.
Dr. John Turner is a former president of the Methodist Church in Ireland, now serving in Larne. Dr. Turner, Father Pat Buckley has made a special effort in Larne to make ecumenical contacts with as many other churches as he could. How have you found these efforts of his? Have they been beneficial for the town of Larne?
Yes, I think in the long term they have been very beneficial. I think to begin with, he was rather suspect because we weren't used to this kind of thing in Larne when he phoned us up and asked us if he could come to our churches on a Sunday evening. And he came to most of the churches here in Larne, accompanied by lay people. And I think as time went on, we realised that his motives were worthy, and that really he was reaching out in friendship to the other churches in the town. But this takes a little getting used to, and I would think in the long term, as I say, it would be very beneficial to the town.
But did he risk antagonizing people in the first place by these efforts?
I wouldn't say he antagonized anyone, just they were suspect because it never happened before. And I think it was a very bold and very courageous effort, because there's a tendency in Ireland that if we differ in terms of theology or even in terms of politics, we don't talk to one another. And he was reaching out as person to build bridges of friendship and goodwill, and to that extent I think that was very commendable.
Now that he has been told by his bishop that he has to leave Larne, what is the feeling in the non-Catholic community, shall I say, about that move?
Well, I couldn't speak for all the non-Catholic community, of course, but I can only speak from as I know him, and I think we'll be very sorry, because I think the kind of thing that he was trying to do takes time, and he certainly has the goodwill of our people here, and we would hope that he will be allowed to stay a little bit longer to implement these and to foster this kind of relationship.
He himself is taking exception to the fact that by a decision of his bishop, almost diktat, he now has to leave, and he doesn't seem to have any court of appeal. In the Methodist Church, could a minister be treated the same way?
Well, I wouldn't want to give the impression that I was entering into something which is really an internal matter between the bishop and himself. So what I'm saying is not to be interpreted in any way as a criticism of the bishop's action, because I think it would be very impertinent for me to interfere in the church's affairs. This obviously is a matter between him and his bishop. But since you've asked the question, with us, the final authority is the conference, which meets once a year. Now, there are other courts of the church before you come to that, but at the end of the day, a man would have the right to appeal to the conference, and the decision of the conference would be final.
Finally, Father Buckley did clash with the former mayor of Larne over political matters and question of discrimination against Catholics. How was that viewed in the town? Was he seen as a priest becoming too involved in politics?
Well, I think before he was known in the town, I think that before he arrived at all, there was a body of opinion who suspected him, and I think it took a little time for him to find his way here among people. Regarding the political matter, it's quite true, there was quite a time then. I wouldn't want to be drawn into the political aspect of it. But my view is that he is very objective in his views. Sometimes it might be about politics, but as is obvious, even about his own church. He doesn't impress me as a priest who has a chip on his shoulder.
He doesn't?
No, I don't think so. I think he has an objective view of things. I think he is courageous, and with him it's either right or it's wrong, and if it's wrong he sort of wants to put it right, and that obviously will get anybody into trouble. Any of us who take that view, I think, will get us into trouble somewhere along the line. But he's certainly objective in his views.
Highly regarded though he may be outside his own church, Father Buckley can make his Catholic co-religionists wince as a stream of letters criticising the bishop and priestly colleagues flows to the media. His typing may be laborious, but the messages find their mark. Ecumenical zeal doesn't stop him criticising what he sees as Protestant and loyalist excesses. 8 years among the polarised communities of the north have had their effect.
What has Northern Ireland done to you as a person?
Northern Ireland has changed me completely. I'm a different person nearly today than I was 8 years ago. When I arrived up and arrived into the middle of Divis Flats, I might as well have been on the moon. It was so different. And I suppose during my 5 years on the Falls Road, I learned at first hand of the sufferings of the people there, and obviously felt terribly caught up in that and very involved in their problems. And then in living in Kilkeel, and especially here in Larne, which are very mixed towns, I've been getting, if you like, the Protestant and the loyalist point of view. And perhaps that has tempered any views I might have had leaving the Falls Road. And I feel, having been in the three places, I've got a very good overall view and feeling for how the people of the 6 counties feel, Protestant and Catholic. I believe in peaceful solutions to problems. I don't think that the gun is any answer,
And I agree with the Pope that violence delays the day of justice. But at the same time, I think if we who are in positions of leadership in Northern Ireland, whether it's moral leadership or political leadership, if we don't tackle the basic injustices in the society, then we are leaving a vacuum into which the paramilitaries are only too happy to step. And the other thing is that the paramilitaries are the symptom of the problem in Northern Ireland. The basic disease is the injustices and the discriminations that have existed over the years here.
When you were in the Divis flats, you clashed on several occasions with the paramilitaries. Could you describe how those clashes came about?
Well, I suppose I was very anxious that in the situation in Divis, that the community would have responsibility for their own district. And when we set up the Residents Association, for instance, one of our aims was to keep all paramilitary involvement out of the association. And that would have led us into positions at times where paramilitary people would have liked to join the association and we had to refuse them. And that was obviously very difficult. I can remember on one occasion being told by a member of the IRA that I would have to leave there in a brown box. And I told him that that was the only way I would leave it for him. There was another time then, a very sad time, when the INLA put a bomb on one of the balconies of the flats. And they blew up and killed a soldier, but they also killed 2 of our children. And I marched up the Falls Road with several hundred of the mothers from Divis to tell the INLA to leave the area, which they did. And in fact, on that occasion, the INLA accused me of being a British propagandist. So there have been many occasions that I have clashed with the paramilitaries.
When you came here to Larne, you came into this house. What did you kind of made it an open house. Can you tell us what that meant?
Well, when Bishop Daly was moving me out of Kilkeel, I told him that I'd never lived on my own. I'd always lived with other priests, and that I would like the opportunity of living in a house of my own, so that I could live in the way I've always believed that perhaps a priest should. And we've tried to keep this an open house. I have some people who live with me here, Catholic and Protestant, and we try to pray together. We try and keep an open door for people, and we also have some room to give people a bed for the night and a meal.
Has the fact that you've had some Protestant people here, has that been seen as provocative in what's largely a Protestant town?
I don't think so, because generally the Protestant people I've had have been from Belfast, and so that hasn't been seen as provocative. My visits to the churches, I think, have been seen by some as being provocative, although that has settled down and people have accepted it fairly well.
Father Buckley, can you describe how you got the news that you're no longer wanted in this diocese?
Well, one Friday night recently, Bishop Daly sent for me at 9 o'clock and asked me to go up to his house on the Somerton Road in Belfast. And when I went in, he told me that I wouldn't be needed in the diocese any longer. And he said that sometime between now and the beginning of summer, he would be appointing my successor, and he would expect me to make arrangements for my own future.
And what did you say?
I told him that I had spent 8 years in the diocese and that I was committed to Northern Ireland and to the Diocese of Down and Conor, and that I had no intention of leaving, and that if he went through with what he was talking about, that it would leave me in the position of having to maintain an independent ministry in the diocese. And I also told him that I wasn't prepared to leave this house because it's the only home that I have.
Did he give any reason for wanting you out of the diocese?
He gave me 2 reasons. First of all, he said that I had been too outspoken about church structures and the clergy in the media. And secondly, he said that he felt that I didn't fit into what his idea of a priest should be.
Did he elaborate on that?
We talked a good deal about the place of the bishop. We talked about such things as obedience and authority. And we talked, I suppose, about the whole theology of that area. So we had a discussion for an hour and a half.
You have been leading really quite a public campaign against Bishop Daly and some of his clergy, of whom you disapprove, over recent months in the newspapers. How do you think a bishop can kind of take that kind of thing?
Right now, I must say I would have to reject what you say there about leading quite a public campaign. I think what I've been trying to do is to raise the awareness of people about what the church structure should really be like. And I have been challenging the bishop and the clergy to make some changes. Now, the reason I've been doing that is that There are absolutely no channels within the church, really, whereby anyone who feels like I do can pursue those things.
At the same time, any institution, the head of any institution, will normally not be able to take criticism in newspapers from somebody who's working for him. The normal thing is that he asks for resignation. Why should it be different in your case?
We're talking about the church, which is supposed to be the body of Christ, and we're not supposed to be based on human psychology and political motivation. We're supposed to be based on the principles of the gospel.
But aren't you undermining his authority by criticising him in newspapers?
I wouldn't think so. You know, I think authority in the context of the church is something very different than the context of the state. In our theology, authority is supposed to be service and is supposed to be listening. And I've basically been saying that the model of authority that Bishop Daly and some of the other clergy have is very different to the one suggested by the Second Vatican Council and by, in fact, the new Code of Canon Law.
But at the same time, when you were ordained, you took a promise to obey your bishop. Now, how does that fit in with what you're doing now?
Well, it has always been one of our beliefs, and you and I learned it in our catechism, that if anybody in authority over us, be it our parents or anybody else, asked us to do something which we felt was contrary to the law of God, or secondly against our conscience, that we weren't bound to obey. So obedience is not an absolute term.
So Bishop Daly's authority is on a collision course with his lowly curate's conscience. Two men of God, each convinced he's right. But Bishop Daly is losing patience with the unruly priest who can use his media gifts to make wounding jibes. How one of the more liberal of the Irish bishops has found himself in this unseemly clerical row will sadden his numerous friends and admirers. But Father Buckley also has his supporters, 6,000 of whom have petitioned the bishop to let him stay.
How do you see your future at this stage?
Well, the short answer to that is I hope to continue and will continue being a priest and also being myself. I would hope that I will be reconciled with Bishop Daly in the sense that he will allow me to kind of pursue the various ministries I'm involved in, yet within the context of the church. If that doesn't happen, then I will engage upon a private ministry in this area.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, it means in practice that I would have to find a place to live. It means I have to find some kind of income, and I'd also have to find some kind of work to do. I am very interested in the whole area of justice in Northern Ireland, so I would imagine that I would concentrate on that area.
Is there any gesture you think you could make towards Cathal Daly which would help the reconciliation?
I made a public statement saying to him, if I have hurt, embarrassed, or offended you in any way, I ask your forgiveness. Would you please be reconciled with me? I don't think that I can do any more than that. And also, I am prepared to make concessions and to bend and to be flexible in any agreement that we could come to.
Father Pat Buckley. Well, last Tuesday, Bishop Daly made his gesture. He announced that he would ask a panel of 5 priests to consider Father Buckley's complaints. This move came on foot of the delivery of more than 6,000 signatures to Dr. Daly asking for the reinstatement of Father Buckley. The move was unusual, according to Dr. Daly, but was taken because so much confusion had been caused. Today, the bishop named the members of the panel and set out its terms of reference. But he noted that Father Buckley had not availed of the opportunity under canon law to challenge the bishop's refusal to incardinate him, that is, to grant him permanent attachment to the diocese. The panel is to report to the Council of Priests by January the 15th of next year. Father Buckley, while welcoming this move towards reconciliation, has rejected the constitution of the panel and the procedures it would take. In reply, he has tabled a counter-proposal to the effect that he would have a much greater say about who sits on the panel and how it might proceed. And that's where it's at tonight. But now, our special programmes tomorrow. Tonight will be
to the Industrial Tribunal office in Belfast, a move that is believed to be unprecedented in the Roman Catholic Church. Father Buckley says he was sacked and that the appeal panel the Church set up to examine his case is unacceptable. Well, now to
Father Buckley, accompanied by friends and supporters, handed in an application claiming unfair dismissal against Bishop of Down and Connor, Dr. Cathal Daly, to an industrial tribunal. A Belfast civil engineer who entitled to make a claim for unfair dismissal. Today's hearing was told by a lawyer for Cathal Daly that there was no contract of service with Father Buckley. The father of a 22-year-old motorcycle
Buddy, you were right. You are not real in her mind. You've become her fantasy figure. And now you've got a choice. You can go on